Mark Ellison was halfway through his morning coffee when a loud, authoritative knock rattled his front door. He wasn't expecting company. The only people who knocked like that were either selling something or delivering bad news. With a sigh, he set his coffee down and swung the door open. Standing before him was a man in a cheap suit, holding a clipboard as if it contained the secrets of the universe. His expression was a perfect blend of self-importance and artificial sympathy. "Mr. Ellison," the man said, his voice oozing with fake concern. "I'm here on behalf of the Hollow Creek Homeowners Association. We have a serious issue." Mark raised an eyebrow and took a slow sip of his coffee, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make the man uncomfortable. "Yeah? And what would that be?" The man flipped through his clipboard as if reading a script. "You have been found responsible for causing damage to a neighbor's vehicle, specifically Mrs. Turner's car." Mark blinked. "What?" The man adjusted his tie. "The fine is $5,000. Mark nearly choked on his coffee. $5,000. For what?" "For the damage you caused to her car." A cold wave of irritation washed over Mark. He hadn't even been near Mrs. Turner's car, and now he was being slapped with a fine that could buy an entire used vehicle. "What kind of damage are we talking about?" "A scratch." The man said it as if that somehow justified the price of a down payment on a house. Mark stared at him, waiting for the punchline. But he wasn't joking. "A scratch? $5,000. Mark let out a dry laugh. "I didn't touch her car. There's no way I'm paying for something I didn't do." The man handed him a printed fine notice as if they had already anticipated his refusal. "Security footage confirms your involvement." Now, Mark was curious. "Security footage?" He narrowed his eyes. "I'd love to see that." The man hesitated for a split second, just long enough for Mark to know something shady was going on. "You may file an appeal, but as of now, the fine stands. If it is not paid within 30 days, additional penalties will be added." Mark resisted the urge to slam the door in his face. Instead, he forced a smile. "We'll see about that." By the time Mark made his way over to Mrs. Turner's house, he was already fuming. She had been a thorn in his side for years, filing complaints about everything from the way he parked his car to the excessive noise of his lawnmower. Her driveway was cluttered with a dozen garden ornaments, all arranged in an absurdly symmetrical pattern. And there it was, her car. A silver sedan with a tiny, barely visible scratch on the rear bumper. Mark could have sneezed on it and done more damage. Mrs. Turner spotted him from her porch, her arms folded tightly across her chest. "Here to finally admit what you did," she snapped before he could say anything. "Mrs. Turner, I didn't touch your car." She scoffed. "The footage says otherwise." Mark clenched his jaw. "Then let me see it." She smirked. "That's HOA business. You can take it up with them." He exhaled slowly. "So you expect me to just hand over $5,000 because you say so?" She let out an exaggerated sigh. "I knew you'd be difficult. That's why I reported you. People like you always try to dodge responsibility." "People like me?" "People who think they're above the rules." Mark wanted to argue, but he knew there was no reason with her. She had already decided he was guilty, and no amount of logic would change her mind. So he did the only thing he could. He went straight to the HOA office. The so-called security footage was as ridiculous as he had expected. A grainy black and white video showed him walking past Mrs. Turner's driveway, but it cut off before anything could actually prove he had done anything. No impact. No moment where he touched the car. Just him walking. Mark leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "That's it. That's the footage that proves I damaged her car." The HOA president, a smug-looking man named Mr. Langley, nodded. "It places you at the scene. That is sufficient." Mark's jaw tightened. "Sufficient? Are you serious? I walk past her house every day. You can't just find people based on convenience. The board has already voted. You are responsible." Mark narrowed his eyes. "Let me guess, Mrs. Turner is on the board." Langley didn't answer. He didn't need to. Mark took a slow breath. "This is a setup." Langley shrugged. "Mr. Ellison, I suggest you comply. The more you resist, the worse it will get." That was the moment Mark knew this wasn't just about a scratch. This was about control. The HOA had been getting away with nonsense like this for too long, and he was just the latest target. But he wasn't going to roll over. He grabbed his fine notice, stood up, and gave them one last look. "You picked the wrong guy to scam. Langley and his smug board members didn't react. But they would soon. Mark Ellison wasn't the type to back down. If the Hollow Creek HOA thought they could push him around, they had another thing coming. That evening, he called up his neighbor and good friend, Jake Reynolds, a retired police officer who had lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years. If anyone knew the HOA's tricks, it was Jake. So let me get this straight, Jake said, leaning back in his chair. They fined you $5,000 based on a video that proves nothing? Exactly, Mark replied. And Mrs. Turner is on the board. Jake whistled. That explains a lot. The HOA has been pulling this kind of scam for years. You're just the latest target. Mark crossed his arms. So what do I do? Jake smirked. You fight back. Mark spent the next few days digging through HOA records, talking to neighbors, and collecting stories. The pattern was clear: ridiculous fines, selective enforcement, and shady financials. A few examples. A family fined $3,000 for having a trampoline in their backyard. A retired couple was threatened with foreclosure over late HOA fees they had already paid. A single mother charged $2,500 for excessive lawn decorations, even though other homes had the same setups. Everywhere he looked, the same names popped up: Langley, Mrs. Turner, and a handful of board members who had been in power for over a decade. Jake's voice was grim. This isn't just corruption. This is organized extortion. Mark nodded. Then it's time we take them down. The next HOA meeting was packed. Word had spread that something big was about to go down. Langley, as smug as ever, stood at the podium. Welcome, everyone. We'll begin with. Mark stood up. I'd like to address something first. Langley's eyes narrowed. This is not an open forum. No? Then what's this? Mark held up a stack of printed HOA violations, dozens of them. These are complaints from homeowners, your homeowners, who have been bullied, scammed, and fined for nonsense. The room erupted in murmurs. Langley forced a tight smile. Mr. Ellison, you are out of order. Am I? Or are you just scared that people are finally seeing the truth? Langley's face darkened. Sit down. Mark didn't budge. How about we put it to a vote? Right here, right now. If the majority of homeowners agree that the HOA board is corrupt, we demand an immediate audit and a recall election. Langley's knuckles turned white. You can't just. Actually, we can. Jake stepped forward. According to HOA bylaws, if 51% of homeowners vote for an audit, it becomes mandatory. Langley's face lost all color. Mark turned to the crowd. So what's it going to be? Do you want to keep letting these people rob you? Or do you want to take back your neighborhood? Hands shot up across the room. The vote was overwhelming. The HOA audit was happening. Langley and his cronies were finished. Langley stormed out of the meeting, his face pale with fury. Mark watched him go, knowing the fight wasn't over yet. Corrupt people never surrendered quietly. Jake clapped a hand on Mark's shoulder. You did it, man. The audit is happening. Mark exhaled. Yeah, but we need to make sure they don't find a way to cover it up. That night, Mark and a few neighbors formed a watchdog group. Their mission: monitor the HOA's every move, track financial records, and make sure the audit was conducted fairly. Langley wouldn't go down without a fight. 2 days later, Mark received a certified letter in the mail. It was from the HOA. Notice of HOA bylaw violation, unauthorized activism. A $10,000 fine. Mark let out a bitter laugh. They're desperate. Jake shook his head. They're trying to scare you. If they can't silence you with force, they'll drown you in bureaucracy. Mark wasn't intimidated. Let's see how they handle real pressure. With the vote secured, the county sent in independent auditors to investigate Hollow Creek's HOA finances. What they found was worse than anyone expected. Missing funds, tens of thousands of dollars unaccounted for. Fake fines issued to homeowners, money pocketed by HOA board members. Backroom deals, Langley and Turner approving vendor contracts in exchange for kickbacks. The findings were made public. Homeowners were furious. Mark stood in the middle of it all, watching the cracks in the HOA's power grow wider. This is just the beginning. Langley wasn't going to let his empire crumble without a fight. That night, Mark's car was vandalized, windows smashed, tires slashed. Someone wanted to send a message. Jake inspected the damage. They're panicking. Mark clenched his fists. Good. But the real blow came the next morning. Langley had filed a lawsuit against Mark, claiming defamation and harassment. The HOA was collapsing, but Langley was dragging Mark down with him. The courtroom was packed. Langley, looking smug despite everything, sat beside his lawyer. Mark, refusing to be intimidated, sat next to his own attorney, a fierce woman named Alex Carter. Langley's lawyer rattled off accusations. Mr. Ellison led a smear campaign against my client, resulting in reputational and financial damages. We seek compensation of $500,000. Alex leaned forward, unfazed. Your client is under investigation for fraud and embezzlement. The only damage he's suffering is from his own corruption. The judge reviewed the audit findings. Mr. Langley, the evidence against you is overwhelming. Your lawsuit is dismissed. Additionally, the court finds probable cause to investigate you for criminal misconduct. Langley's face drained of color. The court erupted in cheers. Within a month, Langley and his cronies were removed from power, and several faced criminal charges. The homeowners elected a new, fair HOA board. Fines were reviewed and refunded. Power was returned to the people. At the final town meeting, Mark took the podium one last time. We proved that when we stand together, we can't be bullied. Hollow Creek belongs to its people again. The crowd erupted into applause. Jake grinned. You ever thought about running for HOA president? Mark laughed. Not a chance. I just want to enjoy my home. For the first time in years, Hollow Creek was free.